I'm Brooke, 32, and until yesterday, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. 3 years with Jackson, engaged for 6 months, and planning our dream wedding for next fall. Then came the voice memo, 67 seconds that shattered everything I believed about us. His voice so familiar yet suddenly strange, speaking words about me that made my hands shake and my heart go cold. I never thought the man I loved could be so cruel. If you're watching this from somewhere where trust was broken, hit like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments if you've ever discovered someone wasn't who you thought they were. I met Jackson at my college roommate Tara's housewarming party 3 years ago. I wasn't even planning to go that night. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the Children's Hospital where I work as a paediatric nurse, and all I wanted was my couch and a glass of wine. But Tara insisted, saying I needed to get out more and that there would be interesting people there. She wasn't wrong. Jackson caught my eye immediately, tall with dark hair and these incredible blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was standing in the kitchen, animatedly describing a hiking trail he'd discovered the previous weekend. I lingered nearby, pretending to refill my drink when he turned and asked if I was into hiking too. I love it, I told him truthfully. It's my escape from hospital chaos. His eyes lit up when I mentioned being a nurse, not with that weird fetishizing look some guys get, but with genuine respect. We ended up talking for hours that night, discovering we both loved classic films, cooking elaborate meals on weekends, and had the same offbeat sense of humor. Jackson was an architect with his own small but growing firm designing eco-friendly homes. I loved how passionate he was about sustainable design, how his face would light up when he talked about his latest project. Where I was spontaneous, he was structured. Where I was emotional, he was logical. We balanced each other perfectly, or so I thought. Our first date was a hike followed by lunch at a tiny sandwich shop. By our 5th date, I was already falling hard. By 6 months, we were practically inseparable. He brought me coffee during my overnight shifts. I surprised him with homemade lunches at his office. His friends became my friends. We just fit. After 1 year, he asked me to move in with him. It was an adjustment at first. I wasn't used to sharing my space so completely, and Jackson was particular about certain things. The dishes had to be loaded in the dishwasher a specific way. He needed the bathroom counter completely clear. Little things I told myself, evidence of his attention to detail, the same quality that made him an excellent architect. We settled into a comfortable routine: Sunday morning, farmers markets, weeknight cooking together, weekend trips, exploring nearby towns. I thought we were building something solid and real. On our 2nd anniversary, Jackson took me back to the hiking trail where we'd had our first date. At the summit, with the city spread out below us, he got down on one knee and pulled out a vintage emerald ring. "Brooke," he said, his voice catching, "you're the missing piece I never knew I needed. Will you marry me?" I cried. I said yes. It was perfect. Almost immediately we started planning the wedding. I always wanted a full ceremony outdoors with the leaves changing. Jackson agreed to everything, occasionally offering suggestions about venues or catering, but mostly letting me take the lead. That's when I first met his sister Amelia. They were extremely close, talking or texting daily. Jackson had mentioned her often, but she travelled internationally for work and hadn't been in town until after our engagement. From the beginning, something felt off with Amelia. She was polite but distant, studying me with calculating eyes that never quite warmed when she smiled. When I'd share wedding ideas, she'd respond with subtle criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions. "Oh, outdoor ceremonies are lovely in theory, but so unpredictable. Jackson always hated being cold, even as a child. I tried harder to connect with her, wanting to be close to someone so important in Jackson's life. But the more I tried, the more she seemed to retreat. My best friend Sophia noticed it too. Sophia and I had been friends since nursing school, and she had an uncanny ability to read people. After meeting Jackson and Amelia together at a dinner party, she pulled me aside. "There's something about him I don't trust," she whispered. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching. Like he's evaluating." I dismissed her concerns. "You're just being overprotective," I told her, laughing it off. But her words lingered. Now I wish I'd listened. There were small things I ignored. Times when Jackson's phone would ding with a message and he'd turn it away from me before checking it. Occasions when he'd say he was working late but would come home without the tired look he usually had after a long day at the office. How he sometimes seemed to be reciting lines rather than having a conversation, especially around my family or work colleagues. But these moments were fleeting, easily dismissed against the backdrop of our seemingly perfect relationship. If Jackson was occasionally distracted or secretive, I attributed it to work stress or wedding planning anxiety. As the wedding planning intensified, so did the pressure. Venues needed to be booked, deposits paid, invitations designed. Jackson started staying later at work, claiming a big project was keeping him busy. I handled most of the wedding details alone, telling myself I was being considerate of his workload. In public, we were still the perfect couple. At engagement parties and family gatherings, Jackson would wrap his arm around my waist, kiss my temple, tell endearing stories about our relationship. Everyone commented on how lucky we were to have found each other, how obviously in love we were. Behind closed doors, though, small cracks were beginning to show. Arguments that ended too quickly with Jackson simply agreeing rather than resolving the issue. Conversations that felt scripted. Physical intimacy that became increasingly rare, explained away by stress or fatigue. Still, I never doubted that Jackson loved me, never suspected that the foundation of our relationship was built on anything but truth and mutual adoration. I was wrong about everything. It was a Tuesday morning, completely ordinary, until it wasn't. Jackson was rushing to leave for an early client meeting, grabbing his travel mug of coffee, kissing me quickly on the cheek. "I'll be home late," he said, already halfway out the door. "Big presentation today." "Good luck," I called after him. "Love you." The door closed without a response, but I didn't think anything of it. Jackson was focused on his meeting, completely understandable. I headed to the shower, mentally preparing for my own day at the hospital. I had a young patient recovering from heart surgery who I was particularly concerned about, and I was going over his care plan in my head when I heard my phone chime with a notification. I ignored it, finished my shower, wrapped myself in a towel, and picked up my phone to check the time. That's when I saw it. A voice memo from Jackson. We sometimes sent these to each other with quick reminders or sweet messages, so I thought nothing of playing it while I dried my hair. "Hey, Amelia," Jackson's voice filled the bathroom. "Sorry to call so early, but I need to vent before this client meeting, and you're the only one I can talk to about this stuff." I froze, realizing the message wasn't meant for me. I should have stopped listening right then, but something in his tone, a weariness I rarely heard, kept my finger from hitting pause. "The wedding planning is driving me insane," he continued. "Brooke is obsessed with every little detail, like which shade of burgundy the napkins should be. Who cares? It's just for show anyway." My stomach tightened. Just for show. Honestly, I'm having serious second thoughts about going through with this. You were right when you said I was rushing into things. The hairdryer dropped from my hand, clattering against the sink. Every day I have to pretend to be interested in her boring hospital stories. Did I tell you she wants us to cut our honeymoon short so she can get back to her precious patients, as if a few days would make any difference? My legs felt weak. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub, the cold porcelain shocking against my skin, and her appearance. I mean, she's not ugly, but she could definitely make more effort, always in those childish scrubs with cartoon characters. Remember when we ran into Megan last month? Now that's how a professional woman should present herself. Tears stung my eyes. Jackson had told me how beautiful I looked that day, in my Winnie the Pooh scrubs, how he loved that I brought joy to my pediatric patients. The worst part is her family. Her dad is so full of himself with his software company, but those connections are too valuable to walk away from. That contract we got through him last year saved the firm. My hand covered my mouth, stifling a gasp. I had introduced Jackson to my father specifically because he'd mentioned wanting advice from someone successful in business. Dad had been so impressed with Jackson that he'd recommended him to design a new office complex. Remember that stuff she told me about her parents' marriage problems? I've been using that to manipulate her whenever she gets too demanding. We don't want to end up like your parents, I say, and she backs right down. I felt physically ill. I'd confided in Jackson during a vulnerable moment about my parents' near divorce years ago, how it had affected me deeply. He'd held me, comforted, me promised we'd always communicate honestly. Anyway, I'm still not sure what to do. Breaking the engagement would be messy, and I'd lose all those connections with her family, plus the money I've invested in the wedding. But staying with her forever, I don't know if I can keep pretending. There was a pause, and I heard him sigh. Sometimes I think about Megan, what might have been if I'd fought harder for us. At least she understood the lifestyle I want. Brooke's idea of success is so small town, so ordinary, perfect little house, 2 kids' vacations to the same boring beach every year. The dreams we'd shared, the future we'd planned together. All fabrications. Gotta go, about to head into the meeting. Don't say anything to Mum about this, okay? As far as everyone's concerned, I'm still the perfect happy fiancé. Let's grab dinner this weekend, just us. I need a break from Brooke's wedding obsession. The memo ended. 67 seconds that demolished 3 years of my life. I sat there shivering despite the steam-filled bathroom, trying to process what I'd just heard. My first thought, desperately grasping for any explanation, was that this was some kind of joke, a terrible, cruel prank. But the weariness in his voice, the casual contempt, the specific details, this wasn't a performance. This was Jackson speaking honestly to his sister, never intending for me to hear. I replayed the memo, hoping I'd misunderstood something, taken his words out of context. But the second listen was worse, catching nuances I'd missed initially. The dismissive tone when he said my name, the way he laughed softly after mentioning my small-town dreams. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I felt cold from the inside out, as though ice water had replaced my blood. The bathroom floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I sat with my head between my knees, forcing myself to breathe. Once the initial shock subsided, my mind raced with questions. How long had he felt this way? Was anything between us real? Who else knew? Had people been pitying me behind my back? I called the hospital and told them I was sick, something I'd done perhaps twice in my entire career. I couldn't face my patients, couldn't trust myself to focus on their care when my entire reality had just imploded. Then I sat on our shared bed, staring at my engagement ring, the emerald that had seemed so thoughtfully chosen because green brings out the gold in your eyes, now looked dull and meaningless, a prop in Jackson's performance. I knew I should confront him immediately, demand explanations, express my hurt and anger, but a strange calm was settling over me. A detached, analytical mindset I recognized from medical emergencies at work. Before I confronted Jackson, I needed to understand the full scope of his deception. With Jackson gone for the day, I had the apartment to myself. For the first time in our relationship, I decided to search through his things. The very act made me feel dirty, invasive. This wasn't who I was. But then again, Jackson wasn't who I thought he was either. I started with his desk drawer, the one he always kept meticulously organized. Among the neatly arranged pens and paper clips, I found a small key I didn't recognize. It opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, which I'd always assumed contained old work documents. Instead, I found a folder labeled simply personal. Inside were emails printed and carefully preserved between Jackson and someone named Megan Sanders, the same Megan he'd mentioned in the voice memo. The emails started 3 years ago, right around the time we began dating, and continued sporadically through our relationship. The early ones were tense, documenting their breakup. Apparently, Jackson had ended things with Megan just weeks before meeting me, but the more recent exchanges told a different story. While not explicitly romantic, they were intimate in a way that made my stomach churn. Inside jokes, references to shared memories, complaints about current circumstances, including vague references to feeling trapped and maintaining appearances. In one email from just 2 months ago, Megan wrote, "Remember what you said at the conference. The offer still stands whenever you're ready to admit what you really want." Behind the email folder was another labeled financials. I'd always been impressed by Jackson's financial responsibility, how he managed his architecture firm so successfully, despite being relatively new in the business. We kept separate accounts, planning to combine them after the wedding, and he'd always been transparent about his income and expenses, or so I thought. The documents revealed a very different picture. Jackson was deeply in debt, his firm barely staying afloat. The office building contract from my father had quite literally saved his business. There were also detailed notes about my family's finances, information I'd never shared with him, including estimates of my parents' net worth and potential inheritance. Most disturbing was a loan application from last year with my name listed as co-guarantor. My signature was there, but I had no memory of signing such a document. Looking closely, I realized it was actually from a rental agreement I'd signed, carefully cut and pasted onto this form. With shaking hands, I texted Sophia, "Can you come over emergency? Don't call." While waiting for her, I kept searching. Jackson's laptop was password protected, but I knew it from watching him log in countless times. His browser history revealed frequent visits to Megan's social media profiles. There were also searches for breaking engagement legal consequences and how to access family trust funds through marriage. When Sophia arrived 30 minutes later, I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by evidence of Jackson's duplicity, feeling like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. "What happened?" she asked, taking in my dishevelled appearance and the papers spread around me. I wordlessly played her the voice memo. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock to rage. "That absolute bastard," she whispered when it finished. Then hesitantly, "Brooke, there's something I need to tell you." 6 months ago, Sophia continued she'd overheard Jackson at a bar with a friend. She'd been picking up takeout and recognized his voice from the next booth. He'd been talking about me, describing how he was playing the long game with my family connections. Sophia had confronted him and he'd laughed it off as drunk talk, begging her not to tell me because I would misunderstand. She'd been watching him carefully since then, torn between loyalty to me and fear of hurting me without concrete proof. The voice memo was the confirmation she'd been dreading. "I should have told you anyway," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Brooke." As we talked, more pieces fell into place. How Jackson had gradually isolated me from friends he claimed didn't support our relationship. How he'd discouraged me from taking an advanced certification at work because it would take too much time away from us, when really it might have made me less financially dependent. How he presented a completely different version of me to his family, making me sound clingy and unstable. Memories resurfaced of moments that hadn't made sense at the time. Jackson's strange reaction when I surprised him at lunch one day, finding him with a woman he quickly introduced as a client. His insistence that I not attend certain work functions because they were boring. The way he sometimes looked at me when he thought I wasn't aware, with an expression I'd interpreted as love, but now recognized as calculation. I'd been living with a stranger who wore the face of the man I loved. "What are you going to do?" Sophia asked finally. "I'm going to confront him," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. But first, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. We spent the next hours documenting everything, taking photos of the evidence, securing copies of the financial documents showing his deception. Sophia helped me check our wedding vendor contracts, all of which had been signed by me alone, making me solely responsible for the deposits. By evening, I had a clear picture of Jackson's scheme. He had targeted me not for love, but for connection to my family's resources. He'd been building a careful facade while setting up financial safety nets for himself and maintaining a relationship with his ex. I was a means to an end, a stepping stone to the life he actually wanted. As I heard his key in the lock, Sophia squeezed my hand and slipped out the back door, taking copies of the evidence with her for safekeeping. I'd cleaned up the papers, leaving no trace of my investigation. The voice memo was queued up on my phone. It was time for Jackson to face the truth. Jackson came home looking exactly the same as when he'd left that morning. Same charming smile, same blue eyes that crinkled at the corners, same tall frame that I'd found so comforting. But now I saw him with new eyes, noting the calculation behind his expression, the performance in his movements. "Hey, babe," he called, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. "How was your day?" Such an ordinary question, as if this was just another evening in our life together. "I made dinner," I said, gesturing to the table where I'd set out the pasta dish that was his favourite. One last normal moment before everything changed. "You didn't have to do that," he said, kissing my cheek. "But it looks amazing." We sat down to eat, and I watched him talk about his client meeting, describing the presentation's success with animated gestures. 3 years together had taught me his mannerisms, the way his left eyebrow raised slightly when he was particularly proud of something, how he tapped his fork against his plate when building to an important point. Was any of it genuine, or had I fallen in love with a carefully constructed character? "Jackson," I said when he paused for breath, "I need to play something for you." Before he could respond, I pressed play on the voice memo. His own voice filled our dining room, echoing slightly against the walls we'd painted together last spring. I watched every micro-expression cross his face. Confusion, then recognition, then panic, then anger. His eyes darted to mine, calculating his response, even as his own words continued to damn him. When the memo finished, silence stretched between us, taut as a wire about to snap. "That wasn't meant for you," he finally said, voice low. "Clearly." "You're overreacting. It was just me venting to my sister." "Everyone needs to blow off steam sometimes." I laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Venting? You called our wedding just for show. You said you were using me for my family's connections. You forged my signature on loan documents." His eyes widened at the last accusation. "You went through my things." "Yes," I admitted without apology. "After hearing how you really feel about me, I needed to know what else you've been hiding." "That's an invasion of privacy," he snapped, suddenly self-righteous. "You had no right. And you had no right to lie to me for 3 years. To pretend to love me while mocking me to your sister, to forge my signature, to use me as a stepping stone in your career. You're twisting everything," he said, switching tactics, his voice softening. "I do love you, Brooke. Yes, I said some things I shouldn't have, but it was just stress talking, the wedding planning work pressure. You know how it gets. None of that was real." But I'd heard the authenticity in his voice memo. That tired, annoyed tone wasn't performative. It was the most honest he'd ever been. "What about Megan?" I asked. He flinched. "What about her? The emails, Jackson, the meetings, the offer that still stands." "She's a business contact," he said smoothly. "Those emails were professional." "Stop lying," I shouted, surprising us both with my volume. "I read them. I found everything. The financial documents, the loan application with my forged signature, the notes about my family's money." His expression hardened, the pretense of innocence abandoned. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I reconnected with Megan. Yes, I've had doubts about us. What do you expect when you're so wrapped up in your precious nursing career that you barely have time for me when all you talk about is your patients and their problems? My career that you claimed to respect and support, I said quietly. My patients who you said made you proud of me. I said what you wanted to hear, he shot back. That's what relationships are. People telling each other what they want to hear. No, that's what manipulation is. Relationships are built on honesty. He laughed cold and dismissive. Grow up, Brooke. Everyone has angles. Everyone has agendas. I saw an opportunity with your family connections and I took it. You got a devoted boyfriend and a nice engagement ring. Fair trade. The cruelty of his words stole my breath. This was the real Jackson, the one who had been hiding behind loving glances and supportive words. This calculating, cold man who saw relationships as transactions. Was any of it real? I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps a last struggle with conscience. Then it was gone. Some of it, he admitted. In the beginning. You're not a bad person, Brooke, just naive. Limited in your ambitions. I needed more than you could give me. I looked down at my engagement ring, the emerald suddenly unbearably heavy. With deliberate movements, I slid it off my finger and placed it on the table between us. The soft click of metal against wood sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. We're done, I said simply. Don't be dramatic, he sneered. Where are you going to go? Back to your tiny apartment with the noisy neighbours. You gave that up, remember, for our life together. I'd rather live in my car than spend another night pretending with you. You'll regret this, he warned, his handsome face twisting with anger. You think anyone else will want you, plain, boring nurse Brooke with her childish scrubs and her pathetic dreams of a little house and a couple of kids. I was doing you a favour by choosing you. Each word was designed to wound, to make me doubt myself, to break me down, so I'd be easier to control. But instead of pain, I felt a strange clarity washing over me. This man had never loved me. He'd never even seen me, not really. He'd seen an opportunity, a stepping stone, a means to an end. I'd rather be alone forever than spend another minute with someone who sees me as a transaction, I told him, standing up from the table. I'll be back tomorrow to get my things. Don't be here when I come. If you walk out that door, you lose everything, he threatened. The apartment, the wedding, deposits, my family, our friends. They'll all side with me. No, Jackson, I said, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. If I walk out that door, I gain myself back, and that's worth everything. I left him sitting there, my engagement ring glinting on the table, his perfect mask finally shattered to reveal the stranger beneath. The next morning I called in sick to work again and waited until Jackson texted that he was heading to a client meeting. Then Sophia and I went to the apartment with empty boxes and garbage bags. We worked quickly, taking only what was undeniably mine. Clothes, personal mementos, my nursing textbooks and equipment. I left behind the furniture we'd picked together, the dishes we'd registered for the framed photos of us looking happy. Sophia had insisted I stay at her place until I figured out my next steps. Her spare bedroom became my refuge, sparse but safe, free from the lies that had surrounded me in the apartment with Jackson. The physical symptoms of heartbreak were overwhelming. Chest pain so intense I momentarily worried about cardiac problems, insomnia alternating with exhaustion, loss of appetite followed by intense cravings for comfort food. My body was processing the trauma even as my mind struggled to keep up. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from mutual friends. Jackson had wasted no time spinning the narrative, telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I'd invented reasons to leave him, that he was concerned about my mental health. Some believed him immediately. Others reached out cautiously, trying to understand what had happened to the perfect couple they thought we were. I couldn't bear to explain over and over, so I sent a brief message to close friends. Jackson and I have ended our engagement. I'm safe and have support. I'll share more when I'm ready. Then came the logistics of dismantling a life planned together, cancelling the venue, the caterer, the florist. Some deposits were non-refundable money I'd never see again, returning gifts that had already arrived from excited relatives. Each task was a fresh reminder of the future that had evaporated. The hardest call was to my parents. They'd loved Jackson, been proud to welcome him into the family. My father had mentored him, introduced him to valuable business contacts. Something's happened, I began, my voice catching. Jackson and I won't be getting married. Their concern was immediate questions overlapping. What happened? Are you okay? Is there anything they could do? I couldn't bring myself to explain the full extent of Jackson's deception not yet. It felt too raw, too humiliating. So I simply said, he wasn't the person I thought he was, and promised details later. My mother immediately offered to fly out, but I assured her I was staying with Sophia and preferred some space to process. What I didn't say was that I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in their eyes, the inevitable questions about how I could have been so thoroughly fooled. Jackson alternated between tactics in the days that followed. First came pleading texts. He'd made a terrible mistake. The voice memo was him working through pre-wedding jitters. He loved me, needed me, couldn't imagine life without me. When those went unanswered, he shifted to anger. I was throwing away everything over one moment of weakness. I was being hysterical, unreasonable. I owed him a face-to-face conversation, at least. Finally, threats. He would tell everyone I was mentally unstable. He would keep all the wedding gifts. He would make me regret humiliating him. I blocked his number. Surprisingly, unexpected allies emerged. Jackson's cousin Tina reached out, explaining she'd witnessed similar behavior from him in previous relationships. He love bombs, then devalues, then discards, she explained. I should have warned you, but he always seemed different with you. I thought maybe he'd changed. My co-workers rallied around me, adjusting schedules so I could take some time off, dropping by with homemade meals and distracting conversation. My supervisor, who had been through a painful divorce years before, recommended her therapist. That first session was a revelation. Sitting in the therapist's calm office, surrounded by potted plants and soft lighting, I poured out the whole story. When I finished expecting her to express shock at Jackson's behavior, she instead nodded thoughtfully. What you're describing sounds like a relationship with someone who has narcissistic traits, she explained. The idealization at the beginning followed by devaluation, the different faces he shows to different people, the calculated use of your vulnerabilities against you. Learning there was a name, a pattern to what I'd experienced was both validating and disturbing. This wasn't random cruelty, but a recognizable behavioral pattern. I hadn't done anything to deserve it, but I hadn't been special enough to prevent it either. I was simply the latest target. The good news, my therapist continued, is that awareness is the first step to healing, and you've already taken the most difficult step by leaving the relationship. Walking back to Sophia's apartment that evening, I noticed a couple arguing in a cafe. The man was using his height to intimidate, leaning over the woman whose shoulders were hunched defensively. Something about their body language sent ice through my veins. I recognized that dynamic now. The power imbalance, the subtle manipulation. I'd been in an emotionally abusive relationship. The realization hit me with such force that I had to stop walking, bracing myself against a storefront. All those moments when Jackson had made me feel small, had dismissed my concerns, had subtly blamed me for his moods. Those weren't normal relationship challenges. They were tactics of control. 2 weeks after leaving, I was grocery shopping when I rounded a corner and came face to face with Jackson and Amelia. The shock of seeing him still so handsome, still so familiar, made me freeze. For a split second, my body responded with its old programming, a smile automatically forming before my brain caught up. Amelia noticed me first, her eyes widening. She tugged Jackson's sleeve and he turned. The look that crossed his face was complex, a mixture of anger, calculation, and something that might have been regret if I believed he was capable of it. "Brooke," he said, his voice carefully neutral. I said nothing, suddenly unable to form words. "You look terrible," Amelia commented, her false concern barely masking satisfaction. "We've all been so worried about you." "I'm fine." I managed my voice steadier than I felt. "Excuse me." As I moved to pass them, Jackson reached for my arm. "We should talk," he said quietly. "There are things you don't understand." I pulled away from his touch as if burned. "I understand everything now," I told him. "That's why I left." I abandoned my half-filled cart and walked out of the store, trembling but proud that I'd held my ground. In my car, I called Sophia, who talked me through breathing exercises until the panic subsided. It was my first test, seeing him in person, and I'd survived it. I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't gone back. Small victories, my therapist called them. The building blocks of recovery. 3 months after discovering the voice memo, I was still staying at Sophia's apartment, but the raw wound of betrayal had begun to scab over. The constant pain had dulled to occasional sharp reminders. I could go hours now without thinking of Jackson, a marked improvement from the early days, when his ghost haunted every moment. I'd begun reclaiming parts of myself that had gradually disappeared during our relationship. My old running routine abandoned when Jackson complained it took too much time away from us. My volunteer work at a children's literacy program, which he'd dismissed as resume padding. My friendship with Tara, who he'd claimed was jealous of our relationship. The more distance I gained from the relationship, the more clearly I could see the systematic way Jackson had isolated and diminished me. He'd never forbidden anything outright that would have been too obvious. Instead, he'd used subtle discouragement, small comments that made activities I enjoyed seem selfish or pointless. "Running again, I was hoping we could have breakfast together. I barely see you anymore. That volunteer program takes up your only free weekend. Don't you want us to have quality time? Tara always puts you in a weird mood. Have you noticed how negative you are after seeing her?" Insidious comments that made me the problem, made my independence seem like a character flaw. In therapy, I was learning to recognize these tactics, to understand how they'd worked on me. I wasn't weak for falling for them, my therapist assured me. Manipulators like Jackson were experts at finding insecurities and exploiting them. Through mutual friends, I heard Jackson had quickly reconnected with Megan, confirming my suspicions that their relationship had never truly ended. They were now officially dating, appearing together at industry events, posting coupled-up photos on social media. The speed of their public relationship suggested it had been ongoing in the shadows of our engagement. Strangely, this knowledge didn't hurt as much as I'd expected. Instead, it reinforced that leaving had been the right decision. Jackson hadn't loved me, hadn't even really known me. He'd loved what I could provide, the connections and image I represented. With that realization came a new focus on my career. I applied for an advanced certification program at the hospital, something Jackson had discouraged as taking too much time away from wedding planning. My supervisor was enthusiastic, even offering to adjust my schedule to accommodate the classes. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based solely on what I wanted, not how they would affect someone else's perception of me. The freedom was both terrifying and exhilarating. I also decided to take a solo trip, something I'd never done before. Just a weekend at a lakeside cabin a few hours away, but it represented a huge step in my independence. I'd always travelled with friends, or Jackson never trusting my own company enough to venture out alone. Those 3 days by the lake were transformative. I hiked when I wanted to read for hours without feeling guilty about wasting time, ate when I was hungry without planning meals around someone else's schedule. I rediscovered the pleasure of my own uninterrupted thoughts. On my last morning there, walking along the lakeshore, I ran into Daniel, a nurse who'd worked at my hospital before transferring to a research position. We'd always gotten along well, sharing the same dark humour that develops in healthcare, but had never been close friends. Over coffee at the lakeside cafe, he shared his own story of a relationship gone wrong, a fiancé who'd cheated with his best friend. His openness about the pain and subsequent growth gave me a perspective I'd been missing, someone who was further along the healing journey than I was. The weirdest part, he said, stirring his coffee, is that now I'm actually grateful it happened. Not the betrayal itself, but what it taught me about myself, how strong I could be, what I really want in a partner. I wasn't quite there yet, couldn't imagine being grateful for the voice memo that had shattered my world. But seeing Daniel now, 3 years past his heartbreak and clearly thriving, gave me hope that such healing was possible. Back home, I began going through old photos, a task I'd been avoiding. Jackson and I, smiling on hiking trails at friends' weddings on vacation. But with my new perspective, I noticed what I'd missed before, how my smile had grown tighter over time, less spontaneous. How in later photos, I was often angled toward Jackson, seeking approval, while he faced the camera confidently. The changes had been so gradual, I hadn't noticed them happening. Like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water, I hadn't realised I was being diminished until I was already a fraction of myself. I started taking new photos, selfies in places I enjoyed with friends who uplifted me, creating new visual memories to replace the tainted ones. I also began exploring interests Jackson had subtly discouraged. Pottery classes he'd called messy and impractical, documentary films he'd found depressing and pretentious, friendships with people he'd deemed not ambitious enough. Each reclaimed interest, each rekindled friendship was another piece of myself, returning stronger for having been tested. Therapy was teaching me about patterns in my relationships, how my desire to care for others sometimes translated into accepting less care in return. How my parents' rocky marriage had instilled a deep fear of conflict, making me vulnerable to someone like Jackson, who weaponized that fear to avoid real conversations. I was learning to set boundaries, to recognize red flags, to trust my instincts when something felt wrong rather than rationalizing it away. There were still bad days. Times when a song on the radio, a glimpse of a tall, dark-haired man, or even the scent of Jackson's favourite coffee would plunge me back into grief for what I'd thought we had. Days when I questioned every decision, wondering if I'd overreacted to the voice memo, if I should have tried harder to make things work. Then I would replay his words in my head, the casual cruelty, the calculated exploitation, and remember why I left. 6 months after the breakup, Jackson texted from a new number bypassing my block. Things with Megan had apparently ended badly. He was sorry. He'd been going through a difficult time. He'd made a terrible mistake. Could we meet to talk? The old Brooke. Might have agreed, might have been flattered by his renewed interest, might have given him another chance to hurt me, but I was no longer that woman. Do not contact me again, I replied, then blocked the new number too. For the first time, I realised I'd gone a whole day without thinking about him until his text arrived. Progress. I wasn't ready to date again, wasn't sure when I would be, but I was becoming interested in the possibility of it, in the idea that someday I might trust someone enough to be vulnerable again. Not yet, but someday. In the meantime, I was discovering the joy of focusing entirely on my own growth, my own healing, my own needs. After years of orienting my life around making someone else happy, there was a profound liberation in being my own priority. A young nurse at work was going through something similar, her boyfriend's emotional manipulation becoming increasingly obvious to everyone but her. I recognized her excuses, her rationalizations, because they'd once been my own. Gently, without pushing, I shared parts of my story with her, offered resources, made myself available to listen. When she finally left him, she told me my support had been the catalyst, showing her that there was life after a toxic relationship, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from something that's destroying us, even when walking away feels like failure. Helping her gave my pain purpose, transformed my experience from merely personal tragedy to something that could benefit others. This too was healing. 1 year to the day after discovering the voice memo that changed everything, I hosted a small gathering at my new apartment. Not a celebration exactly, but a commemoration of survival, of growth, of rebuilding. The apartment was entirely mine, decorated in colours and styles Jackson would have hated. Bright throw pillows, mismatched vintage furniture walls, covered in local art I'd discovered at street fairs. Every item chosen solely because it brought me joy, not to impress anyone or fit some aspirational aesthetic. Sophia was there, of course, my rock through the darkest days. Tara, with whom I'd rekindled a deep friendship. Co-workers who'd supported me through the aftermath. My parents finally knowing the full story and fiercely proud of how I'd handled it. And surprisingly, Amelia. She'd contacted me a month earlier asking to meet. Against Sophia's advice, I'd agreed, curious about what Jackson's sister could possibly have to say to me. Over coffee at a neutral cafe, Amelia had offered an unexpected apology. I enabled him, she admitted, not quite meeting my eyes. I knew what he was doing, how he was using you, and I never said anything. I even helped him, gave him advice on how to keep you invested. Her honesty was startling after so much deception. Why? I asked. Why would you do that to someone you didn't even know? She sighed, looking suddenly tired. Jackson and I, our relationship is complicated. Our parents always favoured him, excused his behaviour, taught him he could do no wrong. I learned early that supporting him was the only way to stay in his good graces, and by extension our families. It wasn't a justification, but it was an explanation, another piece of the puzzle that had been my relationship with Jackson. He did the same thing to Megan, you know, Amelia continued, and the girlfriend before her. It's a pattern. I'm trying to break my part in it now with therapy. Too late for you, I know, but I needed to apologize anyway. I didn't immediately forgive her, but I appreciated her honesty. We weren't friends, would never be close, but there was a certain closure in her acknowledgement of the role she'd played in my pain. Now, a year later, she stood somewhat awkwardly in my living room, separate from the other guests, but present, representing another type of healing, another bridge crossed. As I looked around at these people who had helped me rebuild my life, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the betrayal, I wasn't there yet, and might never be, but for the strength I'd discovered in its aftermath. The voice memo that was meant to destroy me had ultimately freed me from a relationship built on lies, from a future with someone who didn't value me, from my own willingness to shrink myself for love. I'd learned to trust my intuition, to recognize when something feels wrong, even if I can't immediately articulate why. I'd learned that red flags look an awful lot like normal relationship challenges when viewed through rose-colored glasses. I'd learned that real love doesn't require diminishment or performance. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. Jackson still moved in the periphery of my life, unavoidable in a city where we shared mutual connections. I heard he was dating someone new already, another professional woman with family connections that could benefit him. I felt a momentary urge to warn her, then remembered how I would have received such a warning when I was newly in love with him. Some lessons can only be learned firsthand. My own romantic future remained uncertain, but no longer frightening. I'd begun cautious friendships with a few interesting men, including Daniel from the lake, now transferred back to my hospital. Whether these developed into something more wasn't the point. I was opening myself to possibilities while maintaining firm boundaries, a balance I'd never managed before. The wedding that never happened would have been next month. Sometimes I thought about the alternate universe where I never heard that voice memo, where I married Jackson, not knowing the truth, where I spent years trying to earn the love of someone incapable of giving it genuinely. That thought, more than anything, filled me with gratitude for the pain I'd endured. The voice memo had been a gift disguised as devastation, revealing truth before I'd legally bound myself to deception. As my friends raised their glasses in a toast to new beginnings, I felt something settle within me, a peaceful certainty that whatever came next, I was equal to it. The woman who had sat shaking on the edge of a bathtub, heart gone cold with betrayal, had emerged stronger, wiser, and infinitely more compassionate toward herself. A year ago, I told my gathered friends, I thought I'd lost everything. My relationship, my home, my future. What I didn't realize was that I was actually finding myself for the first time. I raised my glass, meeting each person's eyes in turn, to unexpected awakenings, to the voice memos that break our hearts, but ultimately save our lives, and to all of you who helped me rebuild mine. Have you ever discovered someone wasn't who you thought they were? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of healing and growth. Remember, sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you exactly where you need to be. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to trust your instincts, even when the truth hurts.